On the 22nd of September 2025, the world was jolted by an announcement from Burkina Faso that rippled far beyond its borders. President Ibrahim Traoré declared his government's decision to bring in Maxwell Chikumbutso, the controversial Zimbabwean inventor, to Ouagadougou with the mission of developing energy technologies that, if proven, could redefine not only Burkina Faso's future, but Africa's place in global politics. To some, this was an act of genius, a defiant step toward liberating millions from energy poverty. To others, it was a reckless gamble that could sink the nation into isolation and ridicule. As the dust settled, one fact became undeniable. The decision had turned Burkina Faso into the center of a storm that blended science, politics, and destiny. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country in West Africa with over 20 million citizens, has long lived under the shadow of energy dependence. Its soil is rich, its people resilient, but more than 80% of its electricity comes from imported diesel and petroleum. Whenever convoys stalled at the borders, the entire nation faltered. Hospitals dimmed, operating theaters went silent, military outposts were left vulnerable, schools closed their doors, and homes returned to candlelight. This dependence was not accidental, but rather the consequence of decades of a global order that kept nations like Burkina Faso tethered to external powers. International lenders, foreign fuel conglomerates, and political dictates from Paris and Washington all held sway. Each blackout was a reminder that sovereignty had strings attached. By September 2025, President Traoré decided those strings had to be cut. Standing before his cabinet, Traoré thundered that hospitals could not continue begging for diesel, that students could not continue to study by candlelight, that soldiers could not defend a paralyzed nation. His words carried not just frustration, but the defiance of a leader who saw a chance to unshackle his country from generations of dependency. In a moment reminiscent of Truman launching the Marshall Plan or Kennedy vowing to reach the moon, Traoré cast a vision for a new path, one that seemed to emerge not from Washington or Paris, but from Ouagadougou itself. That evening, his government revealed its most daring step yet, a partnership with Maxwell Chikumbutso, the Zimbabwean who claimed he could harvest invisible radio waves from the air and turn them into endless energy. For Burkina Faso's people, the news was electrifying. For the world's powers, it was alarming. When Maxwell's name had first surfaced in African media, it was often accompanied by skepticism. Raised in Harare, he grew up in poverty, leaving school at 14 and experimenting with discarded radios and engines in a modest garage. By his late teens, he claimed to have created machines that conventional science could not explain. Among them was a self-charging electric vehicle, a car he said could run for thousands of miles without ever plugging into a charging station, powered instead by a micro-energy device that captured radio frequencies in the air. He unveiled small generators, said to power homes or military outposts without a drop of fuel, drones and radar systems that lasted 5 times longer than those on lithium batteries, and even a television that worked without a battery or a power cable. To Western scientists, these claims seemed like fantasies violating the laws of physics. Journals dismissed him, universities ignored him, and laboratories scoffed. Yet in Ouagadougou, to President Traoré, Maxwell was not just an eccentric inventor. He was an opportunity, perhaps the only one, that could break the chains of fuel dependency and light up the homes of 600 million Africans still living without electricity. On the night of September 23, inside a fortified bunker beneath the presidential palace, Maxwell placed a compact generator on a table before the president, generals, and advisors. Roughly the size of a suitcase, its plain design seemed unremarkable, but as he flicked the switch, the chamber flooded with light. Bulbs glowed, consoles flickered alive, and the silence of the underground room was replaced by the hum of electricity. A general muttered in disbelief that such output would normally consume 25 liters of diesel per hour. The room filled with awe, suspicion, and the unspoken question of whether they were witnessing the dawn of a revolution or being deceived by an elaborate trick. President Traoré, however, voiced what the moment represented. If this technology could be mastered, Africa would never again kneel before oil, before foreign lenders, or before the dictates of the IMF. By morning, news had leaked, and international headlines blazed. Burkina Faso tests infinite energy generator. In Washington, Paris, Beijing, and Moscow, emergency meetings convened. Intelligence briefings debated whether this was science or scam. But even the rumor of such a breakthrough rattled markets. Crude oil prices plunged by 20% in a single day, while tech giants like Tesla and Panasonic lost billions in market value. African citizens, meanwhile, flooded social media with a single refrain: hope had arrived. In villages lit by kerosene lamps, in schools where children strained their eyes by candlelight, in hospitals where incubators often failed, the promise of invisible energy felt nothing short of miraculous. Yet doubts remained strong. Opposition leaders in Burkina Faso warned that gambling the nation's future on unproven science could lead to economic ruin and international humiliation. Economists argued that if Maxwell's devices failed, the country would be left poorer, abandoned by lenders, and mocked by allies. Even some military officers feared that Burkina Faso was painting a dangerous target on its back, inviting sabotage from powers unwilling to let Africa rise. Traoré's allies countered that the status quo relying on convoys of imported fuel was already a slow death. To gamble on innovation was at least a chance at life. Outside Africa, the reactions were divided. Leaders of nations like Mali and Guinea praised Traoré, hailing him as a visionary for the energy age and suggesting the birth of a Pan-African energy alliance. Newspapers compared him to Mandela, but in Europe and America, skepticism and alarm reigned. French commentators derided Burkina Faso as chasing illusions that could destabilize the region. Intelligence agencies in Washington labeled the technology a strategic threat. Behind closed doors, agents even offered Maxwell an astronomical $20 billion to surrender his patents. He refused. Standing beside Traoré, he declared that the technology was not for sale, that it belonged to Africa, and that it represented freedom. The refusal drew a line in the sand, escalating what had begun as an experiment into a confrontation with global order. But destiny is rarely unchallenged. Just hours after Maxwell's refusal, an explosion ripped through one of Ouagadougou's key laboratories. Flames engulfed prototypes, destroyed documents, and wiped out months of fragile research. To many, it confirmed suspicions of sabotage. To others, it was proof that the devices were unstable. Maxwell himself barely survived, emerging from the wreckage with burns but a defiant resolve. Before cameras, he proclaimed that an idea whose time had come could not be destroyed. Even as the smoke rose from the ruins, in the underground presidential bunker, the small suitcase-sized generator still glowed, lighting up a map of Africa pinned to the wall. Cameras captured the image of President Traoré and Maxwell side by side, their faces illuminated by the generator's soft green light, a photograph that instantly became iconic. Within hours, it flooded social media across the continent under captions like "Africa will not kneel" and "the energy of freedom." To the people of Burkina Faso, it symbolized not just electricity, but dignity, courage, and sovereignty. To foreign diplomats, it looked like the spark of a storm. In Washington, policymakers wrestled with the implications. For decades, American dominance had rested on control over energy flows, oil routes through the Middle East, trade through secure sea lanes, and financial institutions that ensured dependency. If a small African nation could generate endless power from the air, that order would crack. Should the United States partner with Traoré, attempt to discredit him, or prepare for an Africa no longer bound to Western systems? In Moscow, the story was framed as a heroic challenge to Western hegemony, while in Beijing, envoys quietly extended offers of partnership and investment. In Paris, humiliation burned, with officials warning of consequences if Burkina Faso continued down this path. Meanwhile, in Africa's towns and villages, hope burned brighter than ever. For Burkina Faso, the road ahead was uncertain. The explosion at the laboratory had set back research, but the surviving prototype still glowed defiantly in the palace bunker. Maxwell insisted the vision remained alive. For many Africans, that glow was proof enough that their continent could dream beyond dependency, beyond the dictates of others, and beyond the limitations history had imposed. Whether the science would hold or collapse, whether the world would embrace or crush this vision, remained uncertain. But in that moment, the story was no longer about a machine. It was about a continent daring to rise. As night fell once again over Ouagadougou, the photograph of President Traoré and Maxwell beside the glowing generator remained etched in the minds of millions. To skeptics, it was a dangerous delusion. To believers, it was a promise of freedom. To the powers of the world, it was a threat to an order that had lasted 70 years. And to the people of Africa, it was the spark of a new dawn. Whether history remembers it as the beginning of a revolution or the echo of an impossible dream, one truth is already clear. Burkina Faso dared to imagine that light could come not from oil wells or imported fuel, but from the very air itself. And in daring, it lit a fire the world cannot ignore.